Continuation. Ongoing hostilities in Israel and advanced civilian survival measures. As hostilities persist across multiple regions in Israel, the threat landscape continues to evolve. This week alone, the country has experienced a sustained barrage of short and medium-range rocket fire, drone-delivered explosives, and even cyber interference targeting public infrastructure. Public transportation systems, including trains and bus networks, were partially suspended. Power outages affected neighborhoods during critical hours, forcing thousands to rely on backup generators and limited emergency lighting. Critical institutions such as hospitals and data centers were placed on high alert, with several switching to autonomous power modes to ensure uninterrupted operation. The psychological and logistical impact of continuous attacks has transformed urban life into a defensive routine. Schools have been closed indefinitely, and many workplaces have either moved to remote operations or ceased activity altogether. In some areas, mobile shelters and rapid deployment defense measures have been installed, reflecting an adaptive civilian response to repeated assault patterns. Large crowds have been advised to avoid public gatherings, markets, or religious sites, which are now potential targets. Air defense sirens echo multiple times a day, prompting the population to live in a constant state of readiness and mobility. In such an environment, survival transcends basic safety practices. It involves layered preparedness, proactive behavior, and strategic decision-making. Citizens are encouraged to map out multiple evacuation routes, identify alternative shelters, and establish routines to minimize time spent in vulnerable spaces. Keeping all essential devices fully charged and routinely updated with critical communication apps is now a matter of survival, not convenience. Most importantly, trust in official directives is crucial. Disregarding evacuation orders or safety instructions increases personal and collective risk. Families are now advised to conduct rapid response drills at home, simulating scenarios such as sudden missile impact, building evacuation, and safe transport of children or elderly family members. Time becomes the most critical variable during attacks. Each second spent hesitating can increase exposure to danger. Therefore, muscle memory and reflexive response developed through practice can be life-saving. Urban residents must also prepare for the possibility of infrastructure collapse. In areas where buildings are susceptible to structural compromise, interior spaces such as stairwells and reinforced hallways should be prioritized over basements, which may be at risk during secondary explosions or structural failure. Taping windows, securing heavy furniture, and identifying falling hazards can reduce injury in the event of a shockwave or blast impact. For residents in high-rise buildings, knowing the location and layout of the closest bomb shelter or safe zone is essential. Elevators should be avoided during active threat periods, and stairwells must be kept clear for emergency descent. Pets, often forgotten in emergency planning, should have portable carriers, food, and water allocated in advance. In the event of chemical exposure or suspected biological threats, as warned in some cross-border infiltration alerts, civilians are instructed to use makeshift masks made from damp cloths and seal indoor spaces with plastic sheeting and duct tape until further notice. While rare, these scenarios are being increasingly factored into civilian preparedness guidance due to the unpredictability of modern asymmetric warfare. Moreover, the digital front of conflict is intensifying. Cyber attacks targeting mobile apps, GPS services, and emergency networks have been reported. Civilians are advised to verify all alerts from official sources only, avoiding rumors and unverified messages that may cause panic or misdirection. Keeping printed maps and physical notes of emergency contacts is recommended in case of digital disruption. Emergency medical care is in high demand. Basic first aid knowledge, such as stopping bleeding, immobilizing fractures, and recognizing shock, has become a vital skill in high-risk zones. Community-led workshops and digital tutorials are being promoted to distribute this knowledge. In some instances, civilians have been the first responders before official help could reach affected areas. Lastly, recovery after the attacks remains an essential but overlooked component of survival. Long-term conflict can erode public morale, drain resources, and damage social trust. Psychological support networks, whether formal or informal, need to be activated. Talking to trusted individuals, maintaining a journal, and participating in communal rebuilding efforts can contribute to emotional resilience and prevent long-term psychological damage. The crisis continues, and so does the resilience of the population. Survival, under these conditions, is not solely about avoiding death. It is about sustaining life, maintaining functionality, and preserving dignity amid sustained violence. As the week unfolds, Israel's citizens remain in a constant cycle of alert, response, and adaptation, with no definitive endpoint in sight. This week, Israel has endured a series of sustained attacks, escalating regional tensions and placing civilians under constant threat. The assaults have included missile strikes, drone incursions, and coordinated rocket fire from multiple directions. Major urban centers such as Tel Aviv, Ashkelon, and Jerusalem have reported repeated air raid sirens and direct hits to civilian infrastructure. Residential buildings, transportation hubs, and power lines have sustained varying levels of damage, disrupting daily life and pushing the population into emergency response mode. The attacks were reportedly executed by various militant factions, operating both within and outside Israel's borders. Most of the incoming threats have been intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system. However, no defense system is foolproof, and some missiles have penetrated, causing fatalities, injuries, and widespread panic. The intensity and unpredictability of the attacks have overwhelmed shelters, hospitals, and emergency services in many regions. As explosions echoed across cityscapes, millions of residents were forced to seek immediate shelter. Underground bunkers, secure rooms, and designated public safety zones were activated. Electricity and communication disruptions have made it difficult for many to stay informed. In some areas, food and water supplies began to diminish, leading to shortages in local stores. Air traffic was diverted or canceled, and major highways were temporarily closed due to security threats. In the face of such assaults, survival depends on immediate, calculated actions. Individuals must maintain situational awareness, remain calm, and follow predefined safety protocols. When an air raid siren sounds, move quickly to a secure location. If a reinforced shelter is unavailable, lie flat on the ground and cover your head to reduce exposure to blast effects. Avoid windows and exterior walls. Remain in shelter until authorities announce it is safe to leave. Always have an emergency supply kit prepared. This includes drinking water, non-perishable food, a flashlight, spare batteries, first aid materials, personal identification, and a portable phone charger. In prolonged crises, access to these supplies becomes essential for survival. Keep a radio tuned to official updates. Cellular networks may fail or be overloaded during high-threat periods. Communication with family and neighbors is vital. Establish a meeting point and check-in system in case of separation. Assist the elderly, disabled, and children in reaching safe zones. In apartment buildings, residents should pre-identify the most structurally sound shelter area. Community-level drills and coordination with local security services can improve survival outcomes significantly. Psychological endurance is as crucial as physical safety. Limit exposure to distressing media content. Focus on concrete actions, checking supplies, reinforcing windows, and maintaining regular routines where possible. Long-term exposure to conflict zones can lead to trauma and stress disorders, so mental resilience and post-crisis counseling may be necessary. In rural areas near borders or front lines where early warnings may be limited, residents must establish perimeter alert systems using community radios or improvised signals. Farming communities are particularly vulnerable to incursions and infrastructure disruptions. Evacuation plans must be rehearsed in advance, with transportation, shelter locations, and security considerations mapped out. After an attack, assess damage carefully before exiting shelter. Watch for secondary threats such as unexploded ordnance, damaged power lines, or unstable structures. Report hazards to emergency services. Document conditions using your phone if possible, but prioritize personal safety over documentation. In summary, the situation in Israel this week reflects the volatile nature of modern armed conflict. Civilians are often caught in the crossfire. Surviving such conditions requires preparedness, rapid response, and psychological stability. With attacks occurring without warning and from multiple vectors, the ability to react decisively under pressure determines survival outcomes. As the region remains tense, Continued vigilance and adaptation to rapidly shifting threats are necessary for all residents in conflict zones. Part 4: Prolonged conflict in Israel and the transformation of civilian existence under siege. As the days of bombardment stretch into weeks, the line separating conflict and normalcy in Israel has fully eroded. What was once considered an emergency is now routine. What used to be daily life is now a memory. Entire neighborhoods are deserted, not from evacuation orders, but from cumulative fear. Residents who remain do so with calculated determination, bound by duty, inability to relocate, or refusal to abandon their homes. Meanwhile, those who fled now live as displaced persons within their own country, crowded into temporary shelters, public schools, or basements of strangers offering refuge. Inside these makeshift sanctuaries, survival has become collective. Food is rationed by rotation, sleeping space is divided by tape or blankets. Shared responsibilities, childcare, hygiene, water distribution form new micro-societies built on necessity. With conventional infrastructure faltering under pressure, it is the improvisation of civilians that sustains continuity. Every action, lighting a stove, recharging a phone, taking a short shower, is performed with discipline and deliberation. Essential services under threat or collapse operate in bursts. Power grids fluctuate as engineers scramble to reroute damaged lines. Water purification units are mounted in town centers to prevent disease. Pharmacies dispense based on critical needs, with many medications substituted or rationed. Municipal waste management has halted in some areas, replaced by community burial pits or controlled burning. Insect-borne illnesses and sanitation-related health risks are rising. Security forces focus on shielding strategic zones, but the civilian perimeter has widened. Residents self-organize night patrols, checkpoint rotations, and mobile alert systems. Flashlights are kept red-filtered. Conversations are quiet and coded. Windows are taped with X patterns to prevent glass shattering. Apartment stairwells double as meeting points and medical triage stations. Trust networks form through whispers, shared meals, and acts of spontaneous support. Even communication is recalibrated. Calls are short. Data is used sparingly. Voice messages are preferred over live talk. Power banks are passed between hands like currency. In areas where cell towers are down, bicycles and motorbikes carry physical notes between communities. Handwritten maps, supply requests, and location updates. Encryption tools are taught informally. The internet is used strategically, only when safe and necessary. Religious observance now happens in hushed tones, behind blackout curtains. National holidays are acknowledged in silence or with candlelight in shelters. Faith remains, but public expression is contained, internalized, and adapted to the tempo of sirens. Children grow faster in these conditions. Play is tactical, not innocent. Games are themed around escape, rebuilding, or watching the skies. Their laughter, when it exists, is brief, often followed by silence. For those living near borders or active launch zones, evacuation is no longer optional, it is enforced. But for others in contested or fragmented zones, the choice to stay becomes a form of resistance. Elderly residents refuse to leave ancestral homes. Farmers return to damaged fields between alerts, salvaging crops before the next missile. Business owners reopen shops under rubble, selling canned food and solar lamps through broken windows. This is not defiance, it is continuity under fire. Civic resilience also manifests through silent coordination. Volunteers deliver supplies by foot at dawn. Teachers upload lessons to encrypted drives. Medics cycle between shelter zones, tracking health status by memory. Mental health practitioners offer whispered counseling beside broken staircases or over static-filled phone calls. These efforts are not part of a central plan, they are fragments of individual will, multiplied across cities. Civilians now mark time not by hours, but by patterns. The time between sirens, the gap between airstrikes, the return of drone activity at dusk. These markers form a new calendar, one dictated by violence, endured through adaptation. The longer the assault continues, the more deeply ingrained this rhythm becomes. Foreign aid and international organizations operate cautiously, constrained by logistics and safety. Supplies arrive sporadically. Satellite phones are distributed. Maps are redrawn. Meanwhile, internal networks within Israel, the local defense units, youth volunteers, community elders, carry most of the load. Resilience has become a decentralized system operating without ceremony. Still, uncertainty hangs like smoke. Will the attacks escalate? Will a ceasefire hold if declared? Will any of this become permanent? Civilians do not ask these questions out loud anymore. They act, they adapt, they survive. Part 3. Sustained conflict in Israel and long-term civilian adaptation in war zones. As the current wave of attacks on Israel persists into another week, the rhythm of daily life has now fully adjusted to a wartime footing. Sirens no longer surprise. They trigger immediate instinctive action. Streets once filled with daily commerce now stand silent, punctuated only by emergency vehicles, security patrols, and the occasional distant blast. For millions, the transition from civilian life to survival mode has already occurred. Markets operate in brief, guarded intervals. Water rationing has been implemented in affected districts. Fuel reserves are being closely monitored. Civilians no longer ask if attacks will continue, but when and from where. This evolving environment has forced people to develop long-term survival strategies beyond basic sheltering. Homes have been structurally modified with internal reinforcements, sandbagging, and installation of emergency shutters. Solar-powered chargers, water purifiers, and hand-crank radios have become household staples. In rural communities, underground storage units double as both food reserves and temporary hideouts. In more isolated areas, some residents have begun rotating night watches to detect early signs of ground infiltration. Children are adapting as well. With schools closed, education has shifted to emergency learning modules delivered via secure platforms or radio broadcasts. Yet even these sessions are interrupted by alerts. Many families now teach their children basic first aid, how to respond when alone during an attack, and how to navigate to the nearest shelter independently. In bombarded zones, children's drawings no longer depict parks or playgrounds, but bunkers, helicopters, and broken buildings. Religious and cultural events have been suspended, modified, or moved underground. Community leaders issue guidance on observing practices under fire. Funerals are conducted in small private settings. Weddings are postponed or celebrated in shelters with minimal ceremony. Even joy must be rationed, controlled, and confined by the limits of safety. The rhythm of life has been replaced with the tempo of survival. Information flow remains a lifeline. Official broadcasts are monitored religiously. Secure apps provide real-time updates about shelter locations, air raid timing, and medical aid points. However, disinformation campaigns have intensified. Hackers from hostile sources have targeted Israeli civilians with false alerts, fake videos, and social media panic. Trust has become a weaponized commodity. Citizens are urged to fact-check, confirm sources, and disconnect from non-essential media during high-alert phases. Medical infrastructure is strained. Hospitals operate on emergency rotations. Non-critical procedures have been indefinitely postponed. Mobile clinics and field hospitals have been deployed near dense population centers. Volunteers from across sectors, retired doctors, students, medics, have filled gaps. Blood donations, trauma kits, and morphine stocks are running low. The wounded are stabilized quickly and relocated. Morgues are nearing full capacity in some areas. Amid this ongoing siege, acts of resilience continue to surface. Neighborhoods organize supply chains. Residents cook for isolated elders. Tech companies donate backup connectivity tools and encryption software to protect communications. Some civilians experienced in past conflicts take leadership roles in organizing street-level response groups. Others quietly convert basements into medical or food supply hubs. The mental strain is omnipresent. The unpredictability of each day, the silence followed by sudden violence, and the inability to rest without fear all contribute to deep psychological fatigue. Government and NGOs have launched remote counseling services, but demand far outweighs capacity. Many cope silently. Others channel anxiety into preparation, helping neighbors, or documenting events for history. No ceasefire has yet been reached. Analysts warn of the potential for the conflict to widen or intensify. Yet within the firestorm, civilians persist. Some have moved to less targeted regions, others remain by choice or necessity, rooted in place by family, property, or responsibility. The national defense infrastructure continues to absorb the brunt of attacks, but it is the civilians who carry the daily burden of uncertainty and danger. In war zones, adaptation is survival. Israel's population is now defined not by how it once lived, but how it endures. With no predictable endpoint, every hour becomes a test of readiness, resilience, and humanity. The fabric of civilian life has been transformed, but not destroyed. Beneath the rubble and the fear, systems of survival continue to evolve, adapt, and strengthen. Let me know if you'd like to continue into part 4 or adapt this for a spoken documentary, emergency training script, or social media video.